Alright, let's get this going. I've literally just woken up, let the dog out, and doing this. I haven't done anything else yet. Still having coffee. Let's get going. Let's try and get this done. This set up. Twitch. Open up ChatGPT so I can do a quick pass. What can I help you with? Feedback and analysis. Pop in chapter 6. It's even had time to process our previous conversations. Okay. Chapter 6, and this is actually the longest chapter of my book, so I don't know if it's wise to be doing this before I've had my cup of coffee, before I've woken up, before I've done anything. Let's see. Chapter 6. The journey back to his cave was long and slow. Okay. Right away, I'm just judging my first sentence. The journey back to his cave was long and slow. I can be more specific because it's the opening of the chapter and actually include the character's name. I do have his name starting a paragraph, like 4 down. And then I'm seeing repetition between this paragraph and that. I'm seeing a lot of repetition. The journey back to his cave was long and slow, not only because of the throbbing in his ankle, but because of the new weight shackled around his heart. Somehow speaking with her had bound him more tightly than anything they'd done with their bodies. He was still afraid of her. She was powerful, and worse, intelligent. Combined with her beauty, it made her terrifying, and that much more irresistible. And that made her irresistible. No, and that much more irresistible. So that's what I naturally said. The journey back to his cave was long and slow, not only because of the throbbing in his ankle. What if I altered that? The journey back to his cave is long and slow. I don't love that. But if I reverse things, take the second sentence, make that first, change it to due to the throbbing in his ankle and the new shackle weight around his heart, the journey to his cave was long and slow. All that can change, I think. The first three sentences can be changed. The journey back to his cave is long and slow, not only because of the throbbing in his ankle, but because of the new weight shackled around his heart. I mean, first off, those shouldn't even be two sentences. I'm starting with not only. That implies that I'm referencing the first sentence already, which means it should be a comma, not a period. And I can eliminate some words, not only because of, but if I say due to throbbing in his ankle, yeah, let's break that up a bit. Due to the throbbing in his ankle, the journey back to his cave was long and slow. A new weight had been shackled around his heart. Somehow speaking with her had bound him more tightly than anything they'd done to their bodies. Had enchanted him more than any song. He was still afraid of her. She was powerful and worse, intelligent. Combining that with her beauty made her terrifying. Made her even more terrifying, made her all the more terrifying, made her even more terrifying. Even more terrifying and that much more irresistible. Due to the throbbing in his ankle, the journey back to his cave was long and slow. A new weight had been shackled around his heart. Somehow speaking with her had enchanted him more than any song. He was still afraid of her. She was powerful and worse, intelligent. Combining that with her beauty made her even more terrifying and that much more irresistible. Due to the throbbing in his ankle, the journey back to his cave was long and slow. A new weight had been shackled around his heart. making his steps heavier with every limping stride. Making his steps heavier further he went. Alright. ChatGPT just gave up a review. Let's see what it says I should work on. Great. Here's your full chapter review for Chapter 6, focusing on pacing, character arc, clarity, emotional continuity, repetition trimming, and opportunities to strengthen tension and thematic cohesion, all without altering your intent or tone. I'll break this into overall chapter assessment, strengths, structural issues and redundancies, where to tighten or sharpen, potential revisions, examples, no rewrites, overall chapter assessment. This chapter is strong. It is easily one of your better chapters. Leagues more stable than chapters 1 to 2. The emotional through line is coherent. Aftermath, processing, longing, routine, desire, dream, woman, transformation, consummation. The transition from fear to fascination to attachment works very well. The dream motive integrates nicely and culminates in the final reveal. More importantly, Garrett's psychology feels grounded and believable, even though the premise is fantastical. Where the chapter drags is some emotional beats repeat too many times. The daily routine middle third stretches slightly long. Some internal monologues restate the same point with different wording. Pacing stalls right before the mermaid's human entrance, otherwise very solid. Strengths. Emotional clarity. Garrett's confusion, guilt, fear, and growing infatuation feel authentic and not melodramatic. Excellent sensory grounding. You handle texture, smell, temperature, and body sensation extremely well. His environment feels lived in. Her presence is powerful even when absent. This is one of the chapter's best accomplishments. Her absence becomes its own character. Slow burn erotic tension, well executed both psychologically and narratively. Strong final payoff. The reveal of her human form lands because of the build-up, not despite of it. Oh, coffee. Structural issues and repetition. Repeated emotional beats. These appear multiple times. Garrett is lonely. He wants her name. He longs for her voice. He wonders if she's toying with him. The island as prison versus sanctuary versus crossroads. His ankle improving. Dreams of the human woman. These are all good, but some appear 3 to 5 times when once or twice is enough. Mid-chapter pacing drag. The daily routine section is around 20% too long. It's good content, but condensed would equal stronger. Slight timeline fuzziness. There's a moment around the repeated dream section where the reader loses sense of how many days have passed. This can be tightened. Alright. Transition to the final reveal is a bit slow. This is your big payoff. Tightening the lead up would sharpen its impact. Where to tighten or sharpen? Oh, it's still thinking. No rewrites, targeted notes, section, returning to the cave. This part is strong, but loneliness echoed louder than the smoke ever had. Repeated idea, cold bit into a shoulder, repeated cold imagery. And then still waiting for it to process the rest of where it can tighten. Let's see. Her singing had intoxicated him, but her words, sharp, honest, poetic, had infected something deeper. Her singing had intoxicated him. Her singing had been intoxicating. Her singing was intoxicating. singing was intoxicating, but her words, sharp, honest, poetic, had infected him. And then there was her body. Then there was her body. And then there was her body. Sounds more poetic. Her singing was intoxicating, but her words, sharp, honest, poetic, had infected him. Don't need an and there. I really don't like ands at the beginning of a sentence. Then there was her body. I have a fruit fly, gnat. Oh, not anymore. Yeah, that's what you get, motherfucker. Excuse me. And then there was her body. Then there had been the sight of her body. I feel like I need more action. Like, then there was her body. It's just a little too eh. Then there was the sight of her body. Then there was the image of her body. Etched on his mind's eye. I put that there, not veiled by moonlight or buried in the frenzy of passion, but revealed plainly in the sun, helpless and proud at once. The whole time they bickered, another hunger whispered for him to rush forward, to hold her, to kiss her, to ask her her name. How had he never asked her her name? How had he failed to ask? How had he failed to ask her name? How he failed to ask her name? Because he was hungry, because he'd been selfish, because he wanted someone to blame for all his misfortunes. Or was it because he had been caught off guard by how human she was? How she had seemed to ache with honesty. Honest emotion. And loneliness. Like a woman. Like a woman. Like him. How she seemed to ache with loneliness, like a woman, like him. And you can say woman here, or should I say person, like a person, like him? Maybe person is more effective. How had he failed to ask her her name? Ask her name. Ask her her name. I ask her her. Double words are. Meh. Yeah. See, and it kind of calls me out on that. What if we go 4? He failed to ask for her name because he was hungry. Because he was hungry. Because he'd been selfish. Because he wanted someone to blame for all his misfortunes. Or was it because he'd been caught off guard? He had on heed. Was it because he'd been caught off guard by how human she was? How she seemed to ache with loneliness? Real emotions. Like a person. Like him. Let's see. Where to tighten or sharpen? Let's go back to ChatGPT. Yeah, it's going to be a long edit this morning. Section returning to the cave. Loneliness echoed louder than smoke ever had. Repeated idea, cold bit into his shoulder. Repeated cold imagery. Trim 1 to 2 lines here to reduce or to avoid redundancy. Section thinking about her words and feeding him. Excellent internal processing. Just trim the rhetorical question cluster. Who does that? Who gives a gift after being insulted? 2 questions back to back feels melodramatic. Keep 1. How did he fail to ask for her name? Because he was hungry? Because he'd been selfish? Because he wanted to blame someone for all his misfortunes? Or was it because he'd been caught off guard by how human she was? How she had seemed to ache with real emotions, like a person, like him? I mean, this is melodramatic. Section searching the island for her. This is one of the chapter's highlights. It can be even stronger by removing 1 to 2 references to no sign of her. Tightening the raft, lean to description, maybe move the detail earlier or later. Repeated dream woman. This is where the pacing slows slightly. You can keep all the dream content with a trim 1 repetition of seeing her in the courtyard. The night after night phrasing, which already occurs in another part. Routine, gifts and glimpses. This is well done but slightly long. 1 sentence each. From traps, crabs, fruit foraging. 1 gift description, keep the best 2. 1 description of seeing her at a distance. Also use saltiness, sea spray, wind whisper imagery multiple times. Pick the best and cut the others. Section footprint discovery. This is strong. Only trim the scent description slightly. Floral and ocean spray is enough without elaboration. Section final reveal. Very strong. 2 areas to tighten. The initial physical description can be 5 to 10% shorter. Starving man before a feast metaphor is good, but add 1 grounding sentence about his emotional recognition, not just lust. Because of this chapter's climax, you want the emotional recognition moment emphasized over the purely sexual hunger. Potential refinement, sample adjustments. These are not rewrites, just showing you how tightening works without changing your voice. Original. The days began to develop a rhythm that mirrored the tides. He scavenged meager scraps, repaired traps, and occasionally found gifts left near the lean-to. From a distance, he glimpsed the mermaid. They exchanged bows and waves, but she never came close. Tightened. The days slipped into a rhythm. Traps repaired, scraps gathered. Gifts left near his lean-to, and always somewhere in the surf a glimpse of her. Close enough to see, never enough to touch. Conclusion. This chapter is very strong narratively and emotionally. Your biggest improvements will come from light trimming, especially repeated emotional beats, lengthy sequences of routines, duplicate sensory descriptions. If you can, I can produce a line-by-line markup for Chapter 6, as you asked earlier for Chapter 1, help you create a tighter, revised final version, assist with transitions into 7. Let's do the line-by-line markup. Due to the throbbing in his ankle, the journey back to his cave. Due to the throbbing in his ankle, the journey back to the cave. I want to say the on instinct instead of the repetition of his. His. It's too much hissing. Due to the throbbing in his ankle, the journey back to the cave was long and slow. A new weight had been shackled around his heart. I use shackle quite a bit. I use it in Chapter 1. It's weird. Chained around his heart, making his steps feel heavier the further he went. Somehow speaking with her had enchanted him more than any song. More than her singing. More than her singing did. More than her singing had? No, because I got had already. Somehow speaking with her had enchanted him more than her singing did. He was still afraid of her. She was powerful and worse, intelligent. Combining that with her beauty made her even more terrifying, and that much more irresistible. Her singing was intoxicating, but her words, sharp, honest, poetic, had infected him. Then there was the image of her body etched on his mind's eye, not veiled by moonlight or buried in the frenzy of passion, but revealed plainly in the sun, helpless and proud. See, I want to trim words, and I'm adding them all at once. Not veiled by moonlight or buried in a frenzy of passion, but revealed plainly in the sun. Not veiled by moonlight or buried in a frenzy of passion, but revealed plainly in the sun, helpless and proud all at once. That sentence doesn't really work. Okay. Wow. Yeah, it's having issues. Yeah, you should clarify. This sentence. Not veiled by moonlight or buried in the frenzy of passion, revealed plainly in the sun, helpless and proud all at once. Helpless and proud all at once. That just doesn't really work. Let's see. Reveal plainly in the sun. I mean, I like the wordplay, but it doesn't fit. Not veiled by moonlight or buried in the frenzy of passion, but revealed plainly in the sun. Helpless and proud aren't necessarily contradictions either. Do I want to say glistening like a treasure? Listening, awkward, and proud all at once. The whole time they bickered, another hunger whispered for him to rush forward, to hold her, to kiss her, to ask her name. By the gods. By the gods, that's definitely melodramatic. How he failed. How had he been so foolish not to ask? I'm just adding words, but I want to cut down words. How had he fail to ask for her name? Because he was hungry? Yeah, maybe I don't need the melodrama there. Because he'd been selfish? I can combine those things because he was hungry and selfish. Sorry, folks. How had he failed to ask for her name? Because he was hungry? Because he'd been selfish? Because he wanted someone to blame for all his misfortunes? Or was it because he'd been caught off guard by how human she was? How she had seemed to ache with real emotions, like a person, like him. Garrett returned to his cave, but instead of pride, the damp, earthy scent of stone and the lingering ting of smoke from the fire pressed around him. Cold bit into his shoulders, the rough-hewn walls echoing loneliness louder than any sound. He could remedy the cold by building up the fire. The loneliness, however, echoed against the stone walls louder and louder. Echoed. Cold, cold. Yeah. It's taking me how long just to get to that fourth paragraph? Garrett returned to his cave, but instead of pride, the damp, earthy scent of stone and the lingering tang of smoke from the fire pressed around him. Garrett returned to his cave, but instead of pride, the damp, earthy scent of stone and the lingering tang of smoke from the fire pressed in around him. Yeah, this is a long chapter to review. Garrett returned to his cave, but instead of pride, the damp, earthy scent of stone and the lingering tang of smoke from the fire pressed in around him. Pressed in around him is what I want to say there. Cold bit into his shoulders, the rough-hewn walls echoing loneliness louder than any sound. The cold could be remedied The cold could be remedied by building up the fire. The loneliness, however, however, the loneliness resonated against the stone walls louder and louder, filling the cave more completely than the smoke ever had. Plainly in the sun, glistening, awkward, and proud. Simple and poetic all at once. Glistening, awkward, simple, poetic, and proud all at once. It's a lot. Probably come back and want to trim that down quite a bit. Pulled bit into his shoulders. Made him long for her touch. The rough-hewn walls echoed loneliness louder than any sound. The rough-hewn walls echoing silence, echoed a deafening silence. Echoed a deafening silence. Let's see. Annotated markup, chapter 6. Due to the throbbing in his ankle, the journey back to the cave was long and slow. Tightened due to weak sentences, functional, wordy. Okay. The, her, how, Garrett, he, even, despite, he. Okay. Her singing was intoxicating, but her words, sharp, honest, poetic, had infected him. The whole time they bickered, another hunger whispered for him to rush forward, to hold her, to kiss her, to ask her name. How would he fail to ask her name? Because he was hungry, because he'd been selfish. 3, because he beats maybe cut 1. Yeah. Cold bit into his shoulders and made him long for her touch. The rough-hewn walls echoed a deafening silence. The cold could be remedied by building up the fire. However, the loneliness... Silence resonated against the stone walls louder and louder, filling the cave more completely than the smoke ever had. He lay down to sleep, though his mind refused to settle. He lay down to sleep, though his mind refused to settle. It replayed their conversation again and again, each word weaving itself into the dark. It's not necessarily dark. Weaving itself into the dark doesn't really work. Replay their conversation again and again, each word. I said repeating in his head. Like a melody? Her voice followed him, not the song that had once drugged his senses, but the honesty in her speech, her loneliness, the way she insisted she had not meant to seduce him, the way she wanted him to love her. Even recalling it made his stomach twist. Even recalling it made his stomach twist. Even recalling it made his stomach twist with guilt. Into a knot of guilt. Despite everything he had thrown at her, the accusations, the shame, the fear, she had still fed him, mockingly, perhaps, but fed him all the same. Who does that, he wondered? Who gives a gift after being insulted? He turned onto his back, staring at the uneven ceiling of the cave. I've never encountered a woman like her, he said aloud, if only to break the heavy silence closing in around him. See, and that makes loneliness better in the preceding chapter, the preceding paragraph, if I say silence there. The words felt strange in the air, echoing faintly before the shadows swallowed them. Okay, let's go back to loneliness up here. This silence we want to be solitude. Misspelled loneliness. Awesome. Loneliness. Okay. I'm not dropping the E. He lay down to sleep. He turned onto his back. Turning onto his back, Garrett stared. At the uneven ceiling of the cave. I never encountered a woman like her, he said aloud, if only to break the heavy silence closing in around him. The words felt strange in the air, echoing faintly before the shadows swallowed them. That's page 1. Did I just spend an hour editing one page? I did. Wow. The night crept in. Night crept in, colder than he remembered. Night crept in, colder than he remembered. Lonelier, too. Again, I'm kind of repeating that theme. pulled his arms around himself, shivering. Though, it's just contrasting what I've said, though not from the temperature. Shivering not entirely from the temperature. Without intending to, he began humming the sad melody she had sung to the waves. The faint scent of salt and seaweed drifted in from the shore, mingling with the cool night air on his skin, loosening the tightness in his chest. Say back. The sound followed him down into sleep, soft as tide water, haunting as the memory of her eyes. He awoke with a start. It had been one of those instantaneous sleeps. No descent into it, no dreams. Only the sudden realization that dawn had come. Birds sang outside, clear and bright, and the smell of dew hinted at warming air. His body felt newly whole. Newly whole. I'm going to say refreshed. His body felt refreshed. He rose carefully, expecting a familiar stab in his ankle, only to find the pain reduced to a dull ache deep in the bone and an itchy tenderness at the skin. He smiled at the unexpected good fortune and felt a quiet gratitude for the fish he'd eaten the day before. You should always start your day with gratitude. Wake up and give thanks just to have another damn day. Smiling at the unexpected good fortune, Garrett felt a quiet gratitude for the fish he'd eaten the day before. He determined to return to the beach and thank the mermaid for her kindness, and this time ask only for her name. But first he told himself he would tend to his own needs. He would gather food, rebuild what he had lost. But first he would tend to his own needs. He would gather food. Prepare what had been scorched, and not come crawling to her out of hunger again. Whatever happened now would not be out of desperation but choice. Whatever happened between them now would not be out of desperation but choice. The rest of the late morning was spent working with a sharper mind and a steadier resolve than he'd had in days. Resetting the traps gave him a strange satisfaction, a sense of reclaiming something of himself. Many were ruined beyond repair, the woven reeds shredded or the mechanisms snapped clean through. For a moment he felt the heat of suspicion rise again, the desire to blame her for every misfortune that befell him. But he exhaled and let the tension bleed out with the breath. That wasn't fair. Not anymore. Not after yesterday. He fixed what he could. He fixed what he could and rebuilt others entirely, forcing his hands to remain gentle and patient. It's just on page 2? Oh, shit. This chapter is long and wordy and difficult. Alright. Grab another cup of coffee. Hi, Mischief. reeds shredded, the mechanism snapped clean through. Fixed what he could and rebuilt others entirely, forcing his hands to remain gentle and patient. He fixed what he could and rebuilt. I just don't like this paragraph. What's wrong with it? He fixed what he could and rebuilt others entirely, forcing his hands to remain gentle and patient. Each little success, a tightened knot, a reset snare, steadied him. Others had to be rebuilt entirely. At times, it was difficult to force his hands to remain gentle and patient. Each little success, a tightened knot, a reset snare, steadied him. Next he turned to the charred remnants of his fishing gear. The hooks he recreated easily enough from shaped bone. using the remnants of fish the sea maiden had offered. The cord, though, required sacrifice. He tugged loose several long fibers from the hem of his loincloth and twisted them into makeshift line. It wasn't much, but it would do. He smirked ruefully as he examined the shortened garment. What am I clinging to modesty for? The only other soul on this island had already seen every inch of him, repeatedly, and with far less shame than he'd shown himself. If she were to rise from the surf right now, she'd likely mock him for fretting over so trivial a thing. The thought warmed him unexpectedly. By the time he finished, the sun had climbed high overhead. Garrett wiped his palms on his thighs and stood back to survey his work. The rebalanced straps, the new hooks, the pitifully thin line coiled in his hand. The knotted, thin line coiled in his hand. It wasn't much, but it was his, made by his hands, and that mattered today more than it had in weeks. More than it ever had. He felt a quiet buoyancy lift him. Today he wasn't limping toward the shore out of desperation, hunger, or shame. Today he was choosing to go, choosing to thank her, choosing to ask her name and nothing more. No pleading, no accusations, not this time. The memory of her voice, the wounded pride, the intelligence, the softness masked in sharpness, rushed through him like a tide pulling at his ribs. Garrett swallowed, steadying himself. He set the coils of fishing line aside. Cleaned the soot from his hands. Okay. Hey, she's back. Slow, really, really slow. Yesterday I kicked out 2 chapters very fast. I was surprised I was able to get through each one in about half an hour. And so far today I've spent an hour just on my first page trying to get it done. Yeah, today's a struggle. I don't know if it's just because I started like first thing when I woke up or what, but it's been arduous, and this is the longest chapter in the book too. And my goal is to shorten, and so far I've been adding more descriptions and lengthening the whole thing. So challenging, very challenging. I know I got to cut out a lot of repetition, but that's not going great. I'm using ChatGPT to help like highlight where I can make some better changes, but yeah, it's kind of dragging on today. Which is rough. My hope was to do 5 chapters today. So we'll see. Okay. see. This is just too poetic with these single lines. If I can cut down on space at least. Fretting over so trivial a thing, the thought warmed him unexpectedly. By the time he finished, the sun had climbed high overhead. Garrett wiped his palms on his thighs and stood back to survey his work. The rebalanced traps, the new hooks, the knotted thin line coiled in his hand. It wasn't much, but it was his, made by his hands, and that mattered more today than it ever had. But. Why are we starting a sentence with but? That's some poetry right there. That's but is a. Wasn't much, but it was his. Yeah. He felt a quiet buoyancy lift him. Today he wasn't limping toward the shore out of desperation, hunger, or shame. Today he was choosing to go, choosing to thank her, choosing to ask her name and nothing more. No pleading, no accusations, not this time. The memory of her voice, the wounded pride, the intelligence, the softness masked in sharpness, rushed through him like a tide pulling at his ribs. Garrett swallowed, steadying himself. I don't think I need that line at all. I got him clean the soot from his hands and then wiping his hands on his thighs up here, so I don't need that. Let's start this paragraph with an action. Start with a verb, not a noun, especially not such a soft noun as he. Setting the coils of fishing line aside. And he stepped out of the cave. The path to the beach stretched before him with the brilliant light of noon that made every color brighter. For the first time since washing ashore on this forsaken island, he felt almost eager to see her again, eager simply to hear another voice. He walked the shoreline for hours, circling the island with a restless, hopeful energy. He waited at her cove of rocks and felt his heart tug painfully when he saw his raft washed even further up the beach. For the first time since washing ashore on this forsaken island, he felt almost eager to see her again, eager simply to hear another voice. He walked the shoreline for hours, circling the island with a restless, hopeful energy. That might be a good paragraph break. He waited at her cove of rocks and felt his heart tug painfully when he saw his raft. Damn you, caps lock. He waited at her cove of rocks and felt his heart tug painfully when he saw his shattered raft washed even further up the beach, half swallowed by the creeping forest. His initial lean-to stood untouched, no longer adorned, no longer cared for, merely abandoned. He had eaten there the night before, yet it looked as though no one had loved it, or him, in ages. Occupied it in ages. Still he pressed on. He rounded the island again as the sun began to sink, and with every lengthening shadow his heart sank with it. Still he pressed on. He rounded the island again. Okay. Garrett waited at her cove of rocks for hours and felt his heart tug painfully when he saw his shattered raft washed even further up the beach, half swallowed by the creeping forest. His initial lean-to stood untouched, no longer adorned, no longer cared for, merely abandoned. He had eaten there the night before, yet it looked as though no one had occupied it in ages. Still he pressed on. He rounded the island again as the sun began to sink, and with every lengthening shadow, his heart sank with it. There was no sign of her, no flicker of a tail in the surf, no silhouette perched on the rocks, no soft hum carried by the wind. On his way back to the pond cave, he gathered what fruit he could reach, fresh windfalls from the higher branches. And once home, he set his newly crafted line in the water. To his relief, the fishing was good. The new hooks and line worked better than anything he'd made before, and he was grateful for the chance to remake them. Have remade them. But none of it eased the dull ache that settled in his chest. The absence of her, the absence of even the possibility of seeing her, made the pain in his ankles seem laughably small. He had wanted to apologize. He had wanted to hear her voice again, even if only to scold him. I think this but works. I don't like buts at the beginning of sentences because it's contradictory, like it should always build on what came before, but this paragraph works to counter this paragraph, so that works. He went to sleep wondering if he had driven her away for good. Do I want wondering there, or do I want afraid? Okay. So I'm coming to a section that's got a lot of repetition that I need to consider and start to trim. I'll grab my coffee real quick. Thank you. I appreciate that. 1 second. Let me get my caffeine. Mojo. Let me swap this out for you. Oh. There's fresh water. You can see your veg too. All right. This is one of my favorite lines from Rick and Morty. So I had this custom made. It says, "Judge me all you want. Your opinions mean nothing." Sorry about that. I had to get my coffee and feed 3 out of my 4 animals. I'd be feeding number 4, but he is still sleeping. It's my lazy lizard. All right. So thanks for hanging out. I'm doing this Twitch thing because for editing it helps to read it out loud to actually hear, to resonate the words, but it feels ridiculous just reading it to myself. So he went to sleep wondering if he had driven her away for good. He went to sleep pondering? No. He went to sleep afraid he had driven her away for good. I feel like I can build on this line. Maybe just get rid of it. It's like I either need to build on this to make a full paragraph out of it, which is melodrama and poetry, or just get rid of it. Since I am running long, you can just get rid of it. Reading it out loud, yeah, definitely helps. Normally what I would be doing is I would be reading this to my mother or to my wife, but because it's a romance, I don't really like reading it to my mom. And my wife has heard me start so many different books in the past that I don't finish. She just doesn't want to hear any more words without actual, completion. So I got to do that without her help. Even though when I mention stuff to her, she's got great ideas for me to make it more human. Yep, Mom can read the final draft. Yeah, let's get rid of that. That night his dream carried him back to the outcropping of rocks, but instead of the mermaid, a woman stood on the shoreline, a human woman with long dark hair and unmarked pink skin. She wore a pure white dress that swayed like a beckoning hand, and he watched her, entranced and frozen in place, unable to step toward her or look away. That is a long-ass sentence. There's a lot going on. She wore a pure white dress that swayed like a beckoning hand. And he watched her, entranced and frozen in place, unable to step away or step toward her or look away. Okay. Well, that's an easy fix. Get rid of and comma, replace that with a period. That night his dream carried him back to the outcropping of rocks, but instead of the mermaid, a woman stood on the shoreline, a human woman, with long dark hair and unmarked pink skin. She wore a pure white dress that swayed like a beckoning hand. Good place to throw in the name. Garrett. Garrett watched her, entranced and frozen in place, unable to step toward her or look away. She ignored him and stood like a breathing statue with her face turned toward the moon. I need to emphasize this. Full moon. When dawn came, he half expected to wake still standing there, rooted to the sand and spellbound. But he woke instead in his cave. Needles of early sunlight piercing through the cracks and sharpening with the rising day. Oops. Of his makeshift wall and sharpening with the rising day. When dawn came, he half expected to wake still standing there, rooted to the sand and spellbound. But he woke instead in his cave. Sharpening with the rising day, and then that day is how I start the next paragraph. So that's just too much day. That's day and day right next to each other. If I'm not doing it poetically or any kind of build-up, I think I need to change that. So he woke instead in his cave. I feel like instead is a breath. But he woke instead in his cave. But he woke, but and instead. Do those? Maybe I don't need instead. If I got but right there. I got but here, so I'm contradicting myself twice on the same page, same batch of paragraphs. When dawn came, he half expected to wake, still standing there, rooted to the sand and spellbound. I think but is just there so I'm not starting another sentence with he, because it's so easy to start with he, or Garrett, or he woke, or is this an awoke moment? This is me being overly pedantic and didactic and curious. What's the difference between woke and awoke?
Awoke is the simple past tense of the verb to awake, e.g., I awoke early. Woke is the simple past tense of the verb to wake, e.g., I woke up. But it is also used as an adjective derived from African American Vernacular English, AAVE, meaning aware of and actively attentive to important facts and social issues.
Yeah, I think this is an awoke moment. He awoke instead in his cave. Yeah, because I got wake. When dawn came, he half expected to... I probably don't need that, do I? To still be standing there, rooted to the sand and spellbound. Rooted to the sand and spellbound, he awoke instead in his cave, needles of early sunlight piercing through the cracks of his makeshift wall and sharpening with the rising day. Okay. And sharpening with I can replace that with each moment. Right? Now I have taken a word out. I'm not repeating day. I haven't used moment in a while. That day he went straight to the beach, past his traps, past his lean-to, and walked to the shoreline in earnest through the whole of the morning, and walked the shoreline. He went straight to the beach, past his traps, past his lean-to, and walked the shoreline. Paste. That day he went straight to the beach, past his traps, past his lean-to, and paced the shoreline in earnest through the whole of the morning. When he reached the familiar ring of rocks rising from the sea, he waded in without hesitation and climbed atop one, settling there as the tide lapped at his legs. He waited so long that his skin began to prickle and blister under the relentless sun. The water no longer felt ominous or treacherous. It felt cool now, welcoming, almost as if it were urging him deeper. His ankle, once the tyrant of his every step. I don't need the word his here. His ankle, once the tyrant of every step, had dwindled to little more than a memory, an echo of pain rather than the thing itself. As the sun climbed higher and the heat became unbearable, Garrett reluctantly left the rocks behind and returned to the forest to check his traps at last. Some were ruined, others untouched, and one held a tiny, rodent-like creature he couldn't name. It had died recently, still warm, still fresh, but lifeless all the same. I appreciate that little bit of poetry. Rodent-like creature he couldn't name. It had died recently, still warm, still fresh, but lifeless all the same. The meat was meager and bitter, a fitting echo of his entire experience with the traps so far. Still, Garrett had spent enough time at sea to know he would adjust. Hunger disciplined a man's palate quickly. The fruit he'd managed to climb for helped the taste go down, and he was grateful he had never spoiled his tongue the way his brothers had with their rich, indulgent meals. I'll give a little callback to his royal upbringing every once in a while. And then I got his name lumped in there twice. His ankle as he but that when that 2 paragraphs to start with day. That night, that day. That kind of works as a repetition. The water, the meat. We'll ignore that for now and just focus on the repetition of the name. Garrett had spent enough time at sea to know he would adjust. Hunger disciplined a man's palate quickly. Suppose he had spent enough time at sea to know that he would adjust. Garrett felt oddly torn between the desire to return to his family and privileged life and a growing longing to remain on the island and know this ambiguous maiden of the sea would suddenly become the center of his world. It's another long sentence. Garrett felt oddly torn between the desire to return to his family and privileged life. Replace those 4 words with or. Garrett felt oddly torn between the desire to return to his family and privileged life, or to remain on the island and know this ambiguous maiden of the sea would suddenly become the center of his world. That's a long sentence. Let's try this. Or to remain on the island and know this ambiguous maiden of the sea who had sparked his interest. Sparked his curiosity and wonder. Sparked his curiosity and sense of wonder. Sense of wonder. It sparked his sense of wonder. He was transfixed, caught between the pull of the familiar and the magnetic curiosity. Yeah, see, good thing I didn't double up on curiosity. He was transfixed, caught between the pull of the familiar and the magnetic curiosity of something new, dangerous, and impossibly alluring. The thought of home tugged at him with the memories of warmth, routine, and responsibility. He imagined his brothers, one younger, one older, and silently prayed they were well, if only for their parents' sake. It would wound his aging mother beyond reason to lose another child, yet even that weight, heavy as it was, could not fully smother the strange new ache growing inside him. For the first time since he washed ashore, the inland did not feel like a prison. Nor did it feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a crossroads. One path led back to everything he had ever known, the other toward her, led somewhere he could not name. And he could no longer pretend he didn't want to see where it went. That night, in his dreams, he saw the same woman as before, only now she slipped into his lonely retreat and lay her head upon his chest. Again, he found himself paralyzed, unable to move, unable to return her embrace, forced simply to lie there and feel her warmth seep into him. Somehow he managed to clasp her hand. small and frail within his own. And in that helpless state he felt an impossible peace wash over him. When he awoke, the cold and loneliness were all that gripped him. Again, he went straight to the beach to search for his only companion on the island, wishing desperately he could devise some token, some gesture to offer her in return for the strange kindness she had shown him in days prior. Again, he went straight to the beach to search for his only companion on the island. Again, that's a long sentence. Desperately he wished. Let's try spelling that correctly. Desperately he wished he could devise some token, some gesture to offer her in return for the strange kindness she had shown him in days prior. Probably get rid of that entirely. Though he hated to admit it, he still wondered whether he was being toyed with. I have a sense of wonder earlier on. Though he hated to admit it, he still wondered whether he was being toyed with, tempted into some predator's patient game that would end with him drowned and devoured after being fattened on a diet of her fish. Stu pondered. Though he hated to admit it, he still pondered whether he was being toyed with, tempted into some predator's patient game that would end with him drowned and devoured after being fattened on a diet of fish. Garrett let out a dry laugh as he glanced down at his ribs and narrow waist. As if anyone could get fat eating fish, he muttered aloud. A sudden splash to his right cut his humor short. He snapped his head toward the sound and froze. Far out at sea, the mermaid broke through the waves in a graceful arc, her tail flashing before she vanished beneath the surface again. Moments later she rose once more, only her head visible this time, smiling at him with a mischievous tenderness before slipping under and disappearing entirely. Garrett stood stunned, breath caught somewhere between his throat and chest. Then the shock shattered, replaced by a rush of giddy, helpless desire. He stumbled forward, no longer feeling the dull ache of his ankle, only the faint drunkenness her presence always sparked in him. He waded into the surf, up to his knees, and turned in slow circles, searching the glittering expanse for another glimpse of her. The water whispered and mocked around him, pushing against his legs in gentle waves. Light danced over the surface, bright and deceptive, revealing nothing of the depth that hid his treasure from view. His voice cracked as it left him. "What is your name?" he whispered over the water, the words carrying a pain that rose straight from the center of his chest. Again with his fucking chest. I mentioned this dude's chest way more than I should. So his core. I'm not going to worry about that repetition of he right now. He stood there for a long while, how long he couldn't say. The sun drifted overhead, but Garrett did not. He felt as though the sea itself were tugging at him by the ribs. Tugging by... I've done that twice in this chapter, tugging at the ribs. Just get rid of that entirely. were tugging at him, drawing him forward inch by inch. And had a large wave risen to claim him in that moment, he doubted he would have resisted. Let's make that stronger. Less internal monologue, internal thought, more like action. He wouldn't have resisted. Eventually the spell thinned, and his awareness returned to his feet, buried in the cool sand. Small crabs and darting fish had grown bold enough to move around him, treating him as part of the landscape. Slowly, carefully, Garrett stooped and seized one of the crabs. The little creature snapped and flailed in outraged panic, while the rest scattered in a frantic spray of movement. Garrett only smiled at the unexpected turn of luck. Back on shore, he roasted the crab over his fire, the nutty aroma of smoke mingling with the briny sweetness rising from the shell. Heat kissed his palms as he turned it, anticipation sharpening his senses as he tasted the first morsel. He was becoming quite adept at it, fire-making, woodworking. Sure. The rough, satisfying ache of using his hands for survival. His palms had hardened, his fingers bore tiny calluses like badges. He ate a small victory meal while watching the tide creep in and out, the rhythmic pull of the ocean a strange comfort. And as he sat there, warmth in his belly and smoke curling around him, he allowed himself a quiet thought, one that stoked at his heart like a timid hand. She's watching me too. Get rid of the two, she's watching me. That evening, Garrett returned to his lean-to, peaceful enough to ignore the gnawing hunger in his stomach. He fished with a touch of luck, and after a simple dinner, began arranging stones around his fire. The small act made his makeshift home. Made his primitive home feel slightly more civilized, and the stones helped hold in warmth as night fell. The days began to develop a rhythm that mirrored the tides. This is where I get a little repetitious. I need to seriously think about cutting out at least 10%. The days began to develop a rhythm that mirrored the tides. He scavenged meager scraps, repaired traps, and occasionally found gifts near the lean-to. From a distance, he glimpsed the mermaid. I actually have a suggestion for this. The days began to develop a rhythm that mirrored the tides. He scavenged meager scraps, repaired traps, and occasionally found gifts near the lean-to. From a distance, he glimpsed the mermaid. They exchanged bows and waves, but she never came close. Whenever he tried to approach, she was mysteriously absent, only leaving faint hints of her presence when he thought himself alone. Sought her. She was mysteriously absent, only leaving faint hints of her presence when he thought himself alone. Only leaving faint hints of her presence to discover. At night he dreamed of a human woman so consistently that he began to look forward to sleep rather than fear nightmares. Began to look forward to sleep about more than the dawn. Sometimes the dreams merged the mysterious lady with memories of his kingdom, strolling the courtyards arm in arm. Other nights placed them in his hovel on the island, embracing until dawn. More than the day. His longing waxed and waned like the tides, shifting between contentment and frustration. Ditch like the tides, because I use like the tides so much. His lean-to became adorned with oceanic ornaments, each new addition brightening his smile. Yet he refused to give up his pond cave, valuing its shelter and fresh water above all. Still, the fair weather tempted him to linger on the beach, hoping to catch another glimpse of the mermaid, to hear her sing once more, provided she did not mind his presence, or at least gave him warning so he could guard himself against the pull of her natural charms. That feels like a lot. Hoping to catch another glimpse of the mermaid, to hear her sing once more. Even if it meant falling under the sway of enchantment. Uter. Even though it meant falling under the sway of enchantment. This is a long paragraph. This is one that definitely needs to be cut. Over the next several days, Garrett fell into a tentative routine. Days began to develop a rhythm that mirrored the tides. Yeah, it mirrored the tides. Over the next several days, boom, through that time, Garrett fell into a tentative routine. He scavenged fruit from the higher branches, the sharp tang of citrus and earthly scent of moss marking each morning. He scavenged fruit from the higher branches, the sharp tang of citrus marking each morning. Traps were reset, lines strung, and crabs caught along the sun-warm shore, their briny aroma mingling with the smoke of his nightly fire. Ditch that entirely. From afar, the mermaid appeared at regular intervals, gliding along the waves, tail flicking, her presence accompanied by the faint saltiness of sea spray and the whisper of wind. On the wind. Garrett fell into a tentative routine. He scavenged fruit from the higher branches, the sharp tang of citrus marking each morning. Traps were reset, lines strung, and crabs caught along the sun-warmed shore. From afar, the mermaid appeared at irregular intervals, gliding along the waves, tail flicking, her presence accompanied by the faint saltiness of sea spray on the whisper of wind. Gifts left near his lean-to, a silvered shell, a small fish, a smooth stone, reminded him she was watching, teasing, tethering him to a world beyond isolation. Each night, the human woman haunted his dreams, sometimes in the courtyard of his remembered home, sometimes in the dim intimacy of his cave, warmth and scent pressing close yet unreachable, leaving him restless and yearning at dawn. Each night the human woman haunted his dreams. Does this need to be its own paragraph? I think so. Each night the human woman haunted his dreams, sometimes in the courtyard of his remembered home, sometimes in the dim intimacy of his cave, warmth and scent pressing close yet unreachable. I need a descriptor there. And honeyed scent pressing close yet unreachable, leaving him restless and yearning at dawn. I want to say aching and yearning at dawn, because this is kind of a blue ball moment there. Reality blurred, and he awoke to find reality blurred. When one morning he awoke to find a single delicate footprint pressed into the packed earth around his cave. The soil smelled faintly of ocean spray and something floral, unplaceable, and his fingers brushed the cool surface of the ground, tracing the mark as his pulse quickened. That night he fought off sleep, but lay like he intended to surrender. An anxious buzzing in his soul kept him sharply attuned to every sound in the night. Then around midnight he heard it, slow, soft, slow, unsure steps. A subtle creak as his makeshift door slid open. Again with makeshift. A subtle creak as his crude. Will crude work? A subtle creak as his crude door slid open, a shadow passing before the full brilliant moon. Garrett sprang up and reached out, clutching a thin, delicate wrist that felt like it might break if he held it any tighter. There in the moonlight and shadow of a low fire, he saw her, the woman who had haunted his dreams. She was fair and mysterious, her dark hair glowing violet in the moonlight, carrying the faint, briny scent of the sea. Garrett felt the warmth of her body, the softness of her skin against his palms, and the subtle coolness where droplets lingered from the surf. He looked at her, and she stood frozen, just as stunned and silent as he was. Her wide eyes, her round face with the pointed chin and high, noble cheekbones, the rounded lips that beckoned for a kiss, and so he did. He knew her at once. There was no mistaking it. Here was his mermaid in human form, naked, fragile, and unashamed. He pulled his face away, and she watched him in earnest, curiosity that melted into surrender. Drawing her into his cave, he found himself as a starving man before a feast. His appetite surged, and he devoured her flesh with his own, and she responded willingly to his every move. No poetry, no arias, no sonnets or practiced speeches that he had gone over his head for days. Only passion until the two lay exhausted and helpless in each other's arms. Okay. It's taken me over 2 hours to do one chapter. It's a pivotal chapter, and it is the longest one in the book, too. Let's see, what am I at? 3,284 words. I shoot for about 2,500 words per chapter. No less, at least. Except for the last one. But it's earned. It's a huge build-up. It's a huge build-up for that last section. But there's a lot of it's tension and release. That's how you tell a story. That's how you tell a joke. Create tension and then offer release. But yeah, 2 hours in order to edit this section. But again, that feels worth it too. Control C. Let's pop this back into ChatGPT. Let's see. Does my soft, slow, unsure steps. Could be soft, hesitant steps. I like that a little better. Soft, hesitant steps. Let me ditch that. I still feel like this could use another edit. Like, I don't want to do a third pass on everything. My goal is to try and finish this week. I really wanted to finish this edit over this last weekend, but I got way too distracted. Again, why I'm using Twitch, why I'm streaming it, why I'm sitting in a different location so I'm not distracted by other stuff, so ADD doesn't kick in. My cat being catty. But yeah, I actually want to pay for an editor is the plan. A little more human direction. I think I'm good. I think I'm good for now. It's been 2 hours. Yeah. More. Closer to 2.5 at this point. I haven't gotten in my workout yet. I haven't showered. I haven't eaten breakfast. I still gotta walk the dog. So I gotta take a break and adult. Get myself off the island, even though I gotta leave Garrett there for now. And then come back and do chapter 7. So, yeah. Thanks for joining me, Artemis. I appreciate it. I always appreciate the viewership. Yeah. And thank you, Anti-Strick. Appreciate you. Appreciate the first time chat, too. Alright. I will be back later today. Goal is to get to finish chapter 10 today and get myself on track. So peace out, everybody. Appreciate you. Have a good one.